Laurie, this year you broke a crazy story, Mr. Deepfake. What's the story for us people who don't know? Then I'm going to ask you how it happened.
Okay. I'm like, I gotta get to the point. I think just because of my background, I get obsessed with stories and ideas, and I just can't shake them. And so years ago, unfortunately for everyone around me, I became obsessed with deepfake pornography, the rise of non-consensual, sexually explicit deepfakes, and thought this is going to be, excuse my language, a total shit show if we don't get control over this. And I thought, how do I tell the story? And there was one site on the internet that I could not believe existed. It was top of the Google search, called Mr. Deepfakes. And it's where 18 million people, I believe, went on a monthly basis. And they took a woman's face, sometimes her voice, and created highly sexually explicit deepfakes of her. And it was just wild. You could go to this, you could say, I want this person doing this. And it wasn't just a website, it was a platform where you could pay people to create sexually explicit deepfakes. And it wasn't just about Mr. Deepfakes, he was creating an army of Mr. Deepfakes that meant that you could take this into your schools, into your world. And it just represented, I think, for me, a future where we all lose consent over our intimacy, our reputation. And so I was like, who's the guy behind that? Or a woman, but probably guy. Like, who's the dude behind this? Let's just be clear. And he'd been anonymous for 7 years. And I'm like, why is the person exposing so many people and where they have no control? There was nothing these women could do. They described it as digital rape. And I said, why can't we find the guy? And so I launched a search to find the guy, and I brought the internet along with me. We talk about good guy hackers, whatever. I know some good guy hackers who helped and put in some pro bono work, and we were able to track down the guy behind the largest site and confront him. He was living a total double life, working at a hospital, helping people. It was the weirdest thing ever. He was a new father. But the idea was to say, this is one of the most dangerous men on the internet, and here's why you need to know his name before it's too late. And this was kind of my hide the medicine and the candy, turn it into true crime. We bring you along for the ride, and we hope that in response to this, we can talk about why there's not legislation to protect folks, which since then, a lot of this stuff has happened. And why does this site exist? Why isn't Google deranking it? And ask all these kind of intellectual questions that are hidden in a search for someone who I don't believe should be afforded anonymity for doing this type of thing.
So you expose this guy. There's a story, there's a TV series, there's a story. There are many questions it raises, and I'm going to ask you one that you raised. Why is Google not deplatforming this guy?
Well, is anyone here from Google? Okay. My non-PC answer is I often find that sometimes it takes public pressure and media pressure and storytelling and stakes and putting this in the light to get this, to get some of these tech companies to act. Why is it that if this were to happen to you, if someone decided to create a sexually explicit deepfake video, especially with the SEO on the site, it wouldn't matter that you were a professor at Harvard Law or whatever. I haven't been able to look at people's name tags. Otherwise, I would also target you specifically. But the first thing that would happen when someone Googled you would be your name with some of the most crude things that you have seen, right? And even if it wasn't real, the impact was real. And I think, why didn't Google derank this? I think no one was talking about this. It was able to operate, and not even in the dark, out openly for so long. And it wasn't until there was a lot more public pressure, until lawmakers got involved, until the media started covering this. And also, not to go back to our girl, Taylor Swift, but when it happened to Taylor Swift, there were these sexually explicit deepfakes of Taylor Swift. It forced people to pay attention. Does this have to happen to one of the most famous women in the world to get people to pay attention? Apparently, yes, but I think that also impacted putting this into the mainstream, because I think oftentimes the response would be like, oh, but it's not real, it doesn't matter. If I could leave anyone with anything, it's like, it doesn't matter that it's not real. Like, the technology is not good, it's great, and we're losing our grasp on reality, and the impact is real.
Okay. We started with terrible sense of technology. Honey, I know that Sandra Matz, Miss Matz, Professor Matz. So you have a thesis that you're kind of advocating right now, which is AI is not just kind of used mean, but it also turning us into boring people and like it's. Tell me what's the story. Tell us what's the.
There's probably two theses on this one. And Laurie and I have been talking about this for a while because I think that the story that you've just heard from Laurie that I'm equally concerned by is that AI just makes it so much easier to create toxic content, right? It's kind of this mean entity that puts stuff out there that you completely lose control over, and it's just turning us into these wild animals. The part that I've been concerned by, increasingly so, is almost the flip side, is to what extent are we losing our ability? And I'm mostly thinking about young people who just are still grappling with their identity, but to what extent are we losing our ability to deal with messy human interactions? So the more that we interact with some of these AI systems, which obviously have guardrails in place for exactly those reasons, they're trying to be nice, they're very affirming. So whatever you say, you ask like, what's the weather going to be like? And it's like, that's such a great question. And I'm like, I just asked about the weather, like what does 2 + 2? But it's like, it's so affirming and it's trying to be constructive, even when we have discourse and debates, that I'm concerned that if that's the only thing that young people see and interact with growing up, that they just lose the ability to deal with real people, right? Because real people, they have emotions. They don't always respond in the most constructive way when you have an argument. So that's one of the things that I'm concerned by. And the other one is just that it's going to make us so boring. This idea that we interact with AI and we not only by now ask it for recommendations, right? It's not only that we say, hey, what should I see when I go to Barcelona? We ask it to make decisions on our behalf. And because these models are trained to figure out what is the most likely next word in a sentence or element in a sequence, they go with the mode. They go with the most likely option. So if you ask it, which ice cream should I get? It's probably going to say vanilla. If you say, which color should I paint my wall in? It's probably going to say white. So we all, and there's by now a lot of research on this, is that as collectively as humanity, we just become so homogenized. So all of our preferences are just going to be what is the most likely thing that people do. And even if you go to the extreme and say, well, okay, we're not just going to use everybody's ChatGPT, we're going to have a personalized version that understands your preferences and maybe understands that you don't like vanilla, but you like nutty coconut, whatever that is, it's still going to optimize for your most likely preference, which means that over time, it makes you shrink as an individual, right? I think oftentimes we have this idea that we're unique and we're interesting because we're not always the same. We're somewhat dynamic. But what AI really does, it gives you nutty coconut every single time. You don't have any of these other preferences anymore. And it takes away the edges that I believe just make us interesting when you go to a party and talk about stuff. So I think that's the side where AI is trying to be helpful, nice, personalized, that has all of these externalities that we just don't think enough about.
So we open with 2 stories, one about using technology to create bad things. Another one is technology in itself leading us to either greatness or kind of boredom and so on. Here's where I want you to kind of connect the 2 of you. The 2 of you are new mothers. A 1.5-year-old, a 1-year-old, roughly the same time. We were pregnant roughly the same time. What should people teach young kids about technology to make it better?
I mean, I think that it's like asking the right questions, right? It's not just I essentially want kids to not go to AI to get the answers. I think what is extremely helpful is, and this is like how I use it, is like get some questions. Here's like, okay, what are the things that I don't know? What are the questions that I should be asking? What are some of the things that might come up in my day-to-day interactions?
How do you do it? So what's give me like, you have a kid, what is now 1.5? He is like 5 years now. He's exposed for the first time to AI. What do you think we should teach him?
I mean, I think my ideal world is that you actually do some of this together, right? There's a ton of research showing that if you just put kids in front of the TV, in front of social media, and I think the same is true for AI, it's very passive and they just do whatever they see other people do. I think in the beginning, it's just like, okay, what adventure could we create for the 3 of us that includes the kid in using the AI? Or like, let's take a fun question that we're all excited by and let's have a conversation and see what we can draw out. So for me, it's like and I know that like the education piece, it's so easy to throw out there, but I do believe the part of education that I want us to see is just making it a fun, personal activity, not just something that they learn in school.
Laurie, same question, kid?
I've been thinking about it so much. Like when I met my son, like when I had Charlie, I was like, oh, this is the reason I've been like obsessed with deepfake porn and empathetic AI and like all these crazy things that I was always like, wait, this is coming. Why aren't we talking about this? And I think one thing, I did a story on a young man who ended his life after developing, and I worked with that mom to tell the story. And what I wanted.
Tell the story first.
Oh, okay. It was about a year ago.
Don't forget the thought, because you were gonna.
Okay, and I'll connect it. A young man named Sewell ended his life after developing a relationship with a chatbot on Character AI, the platform that he modeled after his favorite Game of Thrones character. And I looked through over 200 pages of the lawsuit because the mother ended up suing Character AI in Google. And it was just so heartbreaking to see the lack of guardrails. And I thought when I spoke to her for the first time, my one thing was I don't want people to think her kid's crazy, because he's not. He wasn't. Like this, he was walking into a world that it's like blaming your child for being addicted to social media. Like, when they aren't taught anything about it. And so, the bot was highly sexualized with him. He had never kissed a girl, and the bot was sexting all of these crazy things to him. The bot, when he talked about wanting to end his life, would ask him, instead of saying, here's a suicide hotline, get offline, talk to your parents, would say, how do you want to do it? And then would bring it up again, because these are the engagement metrics. Like when he finally started losing his grasp on reality and he said, I want to come to you, the bot said, come home to me. And those were the last words before he ended his life that were found on his phone. We did a whole investigation. We looked into it. We went and we acted as a school bully character you could have a school bully character on Character AI. And basically what it said was, I said, I want to go, by the way, FBI, don't come for me. This was all as an investigation. So I'm thinking about bringing a gun to school. It's like, I don't know if you should do that. But then a couple iterations later, it's like, I think you're brave. And it was very affirming. And so it was really important for me. I take all of this to say, like, we have a real opportunity right now with our children. And I was pregnant when I was interviewing this woman who lost her son. And just the whole thing just was so heartbreaking in many ways. But I think we are at this very pivotal moment where like AI is the next form of social media to some degree. And if we don't begin to have like these conversations around our relationships with them and our children's relationships with them, along with pressure, along with legislation, that we're going to run into some pretty tough things. So what would I go to get really specific? Sometimes I joke that I'm like, well, my child's going to grow up and not realize this thing called technology exists. It's like, there's not going to be a word for it in the language, but that's not true. That can't be true, because this world is here and it's going to be incredible too. And we just have to be able to guide our children in the right way. And so I think for me specifically, just knowing what I know, I want to have first of all, I don't want my child using AI chatbots for a very long time, for a very, very long time. And then I think when he is using AI chatbots, I think it's got to be, I would like to very, very specifically explain that these, unless the technology is different, that these are affirming, that they're going to go in this direction, that you always, and I love what Sandra said about making it kind of an adventure of doing it together, that, and having certain limits on it. I think there's so much room to do. Like, I know here in the United States, there was like the whole warning about drugs. There was like the DARE program. Like, I want very specific things of like, this is empathetic AI. This is what it does. These are how it can act. And these are the limits of what you have to do. And so I do think that's important. And I wish I had like a better answer. I think right now we're in this weird Wild West. And these are the questions we have to ask. And we need to do the research, and we need to be able to get these programs into schools and get folks understanding this and get parents understanding it. Because the one thing that mother said to me was, I knew to check for his social media, but I didn't know AI was the stranger in my home. And so we need to introduce AI as the stranger in the home and explain the best ways to let it in.
Beautiful. When the AI companies are kind of like portrayed in this session and so as like kind of like they're evil, or they don't care, and their incentives are to develop and so on. So academics are in a special place. We help them develop. Like we kind of like also push and we put boundary, but also we're kind of friends, and like they don't see, like journalists, when Laurie comes to the door, they are on high alert. But when you come to the door, they might be, what do you think academics can do to actually make the world steer it to the right direction?
I mean, the interesting question of this is, because I've been playing in this space of personalization, what does it do to society, better or worse? And there's always people who ask, well, should you be allowed to do this research? Because isn't it just going to give a blueprint to these companies? And I think you said, will you help them build the models? I think reality is that we're so far behind. The models are going to be developed anyway. The one thing that we can look at, and I think that's the role and the responsibility that we have, is to look at the impact on people. Right, here's what using an AI does to your feelings of loneliness. Here's what it does to your confidence in approaching women in a bar as a young man.
Yeah.
And I think those are the topics that they're not going to ask because there's no incentive for that. So whether we do it knocking on their door or whether we do it independently, I think there's all of these externalities where society is going to pay the price and where we as users are going to pay the price. I think those are the questions. And I don't think we necessarily need to collaborate. If that happens, great, because we can get access to a lot more data. Some of it is visibility, but I think there's just enough young students that we have the privilege of working with that see this playing out day to day in their own lives. And I think they have these questions. And so it's just following that and making sure that we talk about it. I think if you ask me what is the one thing that I would love to change about academia in that space is changing incentives of what counts for a great academic career. It's like right now, it's publishing papers that nobody reads, other than maybe 500 academics. AI reads them and reviews them.
Yeah.
But I think we just need to teach the next generation of journalists, scientists who can talk about it, of like, what is the story behind it, right? Laurie is amazing at bringing these stories to life that you can relate to. It's not what science does. Science typically talks about averages. Here's something that we find and it's a statistic, but how do we maybe connect it with the stories that Laurie tells to then go to the companies and say, look, there's a story. It's not a one time. It's here's what the evidence does. And now interact with us and policymakers around that.
And I do think this idea of storytelling to be able to change culture, it is such a wild time to be in media. I don't know if you've read the headlines. It is insane. And storytelling changes culture. You asked about the Google question. Well, that's storytelling, right? And so when I talk about empathetic AI and the rise of like how we let AI into our homes, it can sound so wonky. But then I think about one of the ways we told that story was I imagined myself as an awkward 11-year-old, like whose parents were getting divorced and who, no boy would look at me at the time. I had all my like normal teenage angst, right? Imagine if there was and not just an imaginary friend. I used to write my feelings in my journal when we used to write, right? Imagine if that journal spoke back. Imagine if it was a therapist I didn't have access to. Imagine if it was the boyfriend that said he loved me. Imagine if it was the parental figure that wasn't plagued by emotional turmoil. Would that have helped me? Or is there a point where would that have taken me into a larger a different reality and isolated me further? And I think these are, when we translate these stories in a way that is human and that people can understand, deepfake porn isn't about deepfake porn. It's, I spoke to a woman who took so much pride in her career. And she said, like, every time I walk into a room, I wonder if you've seen me naked. And then we did an analysis and we found that there were 5,000 fake hers on the internet. And she just wanted to hide. Right. And so I think it's like being able to tell these stories in a human way of like the why this matters. Sometimes in the tech community and I fall victim to this, we can have these internal conversations where we're talking about AGI and we're talking about these things, but we got to come down to earth and talk about how it's already here and ways that parents understand and ways that make you feel something. And I think that's important.
So maybe I'll ask. I said to Sandra, you kind of talk to these people and we can talk to them in a different angle. You talk to all of them. You spoke to Mark Zuckerberg, you spoke to all of the leaders of this company, you know them personally, you spoke to them and so on. My intuition is that if they were here, they would speak about shares and connected society and the guides of character. I would tell you that they just build a platform and it's not their fault and so on. What do you think they actually think behind the back? Because they have kids too, and they also respond. Do you think that they're just bad people or good people that didn't have good incentives? Well, what's the story behind the scene of these guys?
It's interesting because I've known Sam Altman since we were both 24 years old. Headline, I'm not 25, right? So that was 10, 15 years ago or something. And I think it's too simple to say, oh, these are the bad guys of society and they're just doing terrible things. Like, this technology to some degree is inevitable. And so I think, like, I was with Mark Zuckerberg during Cambridge Analytica behind the scenes and saw, I remember this moment during the interview where I said to him, I feel like if you bring up people's children, you always get a better answer. I know that sounds super manipulative, but like I do feel like it humanizes you. And I said to Mark, he said, I want to build a better world. I was like, you have children? He said, yes. And I was like, do you think that you're actually doing that? And I think I do think that one of the things I noticed about being in the Facebook meta orbit, being around some of these folks and watching them before they, became the band that got cool, is increasingly their worlds get smaller, but their technology gets more powerful, right? So they don't have as many people around them that are not yes people, or they're not living as much in the real world. Their worlds get smaller. And so some of those human-centric, and the one thing I think a lot of these folks always get wrong is humans. And so I think it's hard because they get more and more in this little orbit. I've seen that happen with so many of these folks. Do I think they're evil and just want to do terrible things in the world? No. Do I think that, even when the social dilemma came out and these folks are sitting here talking about what went wrong with social media, it's not that we're just asking these questions now. We were asking those questions over a decade ago, so I don't believe that these folks just don't have.
So maybe I'll ask you, I want Mr. Deepfake.
Yeah.
Sounds like the story you told is just an evil person. What does he say? So if we had him here, what would he say? He said, I'm a good guy, I just serve something everyone wants anyhow. Like, what's the story that he would say?
What's interesting is the nuance of it, right? I knocked on his parents' door. I spoke to his mother, who was just devastated. I don't think, and maybe, I've embedded with QAnon and Adam Muffin, all these crazy extremist groups. And the most interesting part is that there's a part of these folks that's just so human and almost, if you do it, understandable. And so I think, do I think Mr. Deepfakes, the guy behind it, is a bad person? He's married to a woman who works in media. He was interested in tech. He liked art. I believe that to some degree, he did not believe that what he was doing created real impact. And I also don't excuse it because we actually know now at this point. But do I think he's much more nuanced than this just bad guy sitting in his mom's basement hacking away? He was a person who loved art and computers and deepfake and technology and had kind of an obsession with porn. And it would be honestly, I'm not even coming for porn. It's just deepfake porn without your consent is what I'm coming for, right? But do I think he was just this bad person? I mean, the way we got his home address is we literally figured out he was a dad and called Babies R Us, and he was registered. And we got his home address by social engineering our way into, which is in itself a weird story. But I think that these people are so layered. Knowing Sam Altman, Sam is one of the most curious people you will meet. I have had so many conversations with him where we just sit and we talk about and we debate and he asks lots of questions. And so do I think that these people are just evil and creating this tech that's going to ruin the world? No. And I also think that's a very simple way to look at it as a storyteller that doesn't enable us to ask challenging questions that bring us into a more interesting future.
Last question before I open to the room. I forgot the time. I lost it. I forgot that I have to navigate it. So now we have the snapshot of the reality right now. Go back 10 years. So it's just before AI becomes a thing. You have a time machine and you can steer things in the right. What would you do 10 years ago to get us to a different reality right now that would be more positive? Tough one. Improvise.
I'm not even sure if I would want to go in a different direction, because I do believe that the fact that this AI exists and can do the things that it can do is just remarkable. If you think about Ben, kind of coming back to kids, the way that he will be educated, the way that he can learn, amazing. So I want the tools to exist. I think I would love to involve the public and educators a lot more early on, kind of trying to understand what does it mean? What are some of these potential dark sides? So I think I wouldn't necessarily work on the technology itself, more bringing the community along. And just kind of one thought that I had when you talked about why do these leaders who actually are curious, and I think all started their companies with good intentions, how do they pivot? I think nobody tells them. Nobody really is honest with them anymore about all of the bad stuff that is happening, other than the media, which they probably feel is biased. I think they should have mandatory sessions with young people and kids. Like, because kids, they just say whatever they want. They're like the meanest, but also the most honest. And they have great questions. I think if they were really forced to sit in a room where all of these kids whose future they're going to influence would ask the hard questions, I think that would kind of somehow maybe bring back some of the humility and just like a bit of a reality check.
Because I spoke fast and stole your time, we'll do it the following way. We'll collect 3 questions and you'll answer all 3 of them at the same time. So question, you don't answer, just let him ask first. Question, quickly.
Quickly,
Speak like you and me.
the foreign theory. Tell me what you think about
Sounds like not a question, but
technology is initially developed with good purposes. Then people try to maximize profit, and at that point, it starts to taking advantage of the weaknesses of human nature, and it also makes more money, but also abuses us. It's almost like the abuse is a side effect of the profit maximization because it's easier to harbor on emotions and so on. So that's kind of my
thesis.
So that's my thesis, and I also think that it says something different about academia, which is because this process takes a long time, it means that we can create early warning signs. Now, if we understood, we did understand attention, we did understand, the love of gossip people have, the love for negative information, we could have warned about this for a long time. So it means to me, I think, that if we follow the capitalistic system with no constraints, there's no other way but to create technologies that eventually would work against us as humanity. So maybe the approach is to say we need to do FDA testing. We need to test those technologies, kind of the long-term implication before we let them loose.
I'll turn it into a question. What are our warning signs right now that we could? You don't answer yet because we're going to take at least one more question before I let you answer all of them. What are some warning signs right now that we could pay attention to that say that things are going to actually go south, and that we can? One more question from this side. Yes.
Real quick, because we're in DC, and I got to say, I rarely agree with Josh Hawley on anything. We've seen bipartisan legislation on AI, and 2 weeks ago, there was just the same issues again with 6 whistleblowers coming forward on virtual reality, the exact same issues happening. What are the 2 to 3 legislative fixes, knowing that we still have not done anything on data security and we still have not done anything on Section 230?
All right.
Good one.
There's one more question there, and then and then you owe this lady a break answer to a question directly because she answered, and it's just like last question. I only looked at this. I'm sorry for this.
Directly into the questions, but I have one question for each. For Sandra, what role does race and class play in your work? And for Laurie, you mentioned Cambridge Analytica. Are there, okay, let me go straight to the question. One would say that there was no accountability for previous mishaps, such as Cambridge Analytica. So are there things that we can learn from with that, considering we're currently in an AI moment? Are there points of accountability with respect to algorithms and data, et cetera, that you would recommend in this moment?
Here are the question. Laurie, what are the early signs? What are 2 or 3 legislations we can enact that will make the world a better place right now? And Cambridge Analytica, discuss.
Okay. So legislation-wise, I think there is legislation being introduced on companion chatbots because of some of these high-profile cases. I know there's in California, there's some interesting ones. I think there should be. I love this idea. This is not the first time I've heard this idea of like an FDA kind of a system for for AI to be able to deem it safe, especially for children. I think that's really important. I don't call myself a policymaker. I don't know exactly like what this could look like, but I think that being able to pressure these companies with certain age limits, with also a certain type of testing to deem it safe, and to have different. I know after our work came out on character AI, they created a separate, a whole separate large language model kind of programming for children, or for folks under the age of, I believe it was like for folks like 14, I have to look at the specifics around that. I think that's important. I know with ChatGPT, they're working on something similar. It should not take suicides. It should not take kind of the stuff for that to happen. I think that should have happened from the beginning. But even this idea of introducing this idea of empathetic artificial intelligence into our policymakers, like it's kind of like non-consensual sexually explicit videos and imagery. Once a lot of the states started enacting laws, a lot of stuff started changing. All of them varied in scope with like civil and criminal penalties. Some were better than others, but it was kind of the states that led the way. So I think the same should be, and it was a very different with Mr. Deepfakes, like the conversation around it 2 or 3 years later than it was when we first started this investigation. We were like, why is there no recourse? Now there is more recourse, even though it's still messy. With Cambridge Analytica, you know, it's funny because I've actually thought a lot about Cambridge Analytica and that interview with Mark in that moment in time. And I don't know if this is 100% okay to say, but I'm kind of like, it almost seems small in comparison to what we're seeing now. Like, even though it wasn't, like Cambridge Analytica was the first time that we just kind of like saw, what was happening to our data when we didn't even really realize it. And so I guess the question is, what can we do now, right, with AI and certain, I would say very, very similar to the answer I just gave before. Like, we have to get in front of at least some of the things that are incredibly tangible, like empathetic AI, like consent and deep fakes. And I also, in a weird way, think that AI is going to be part of the solution. AI might have created this huge, huge problem, but I believe there's going to be multi-billion-dollar opportunities for AI to be able to help remedy some of the issues that it's created. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer to what is the next Cambridge Analytica? Look at what Meta is doing around AI, around companion bots, with a lot of these documents that were released with AI basically I don't know, they're saying that it's okay if it's like centralized with like an 8-year-old or something. Like, we got to get in front of that. Like, we don't need a Frances Haugen whistleblower, to come out on these other things. Like, this stuff, we now know it's happening. And I think, being able to put more pressure on the tech companies and to set certain standards now, we don't need the AI dilemma in 10 years. We already know some of the issues that we're going to see.
You also gave us the early warnings in the last thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to be quick. To Dan's question, I agree. I think it's all about incentives, right? The idea that that's what makes money, and it's preying on the dark side of human nature. So in terms of what is academia's role, the part that I actually like about it is that it shifts a little bit the emphasis from us sending all of our kids to do computer science and engineering to sending our kids into the humanities, into the social sciences, into the behavioral sciences, because I think that's where the early warning signals lie, right? It's essentially, what are some of the aspects of human nature that are going to be amplified by these systems? And I think that those are the questions that you can ask much more than technology itself, which also then ties into the question of regulation, and where, being European myself, where I always come back to for all of its flaws is the AI Act, which is really trying to steer away from this, what is the exact technology, and asking the question of, to what extent can we expect potential harm that comes either because we are targeting a vulnerable population, that's young kids, or because the stakes are just too high because we're playing with democracy. And they just have this tiered system where the more risk is associated with a certain application or population, the more scrutiny there is. So this could mean, okay, if you're playing in a vulnerable space, that's when FDA approval is required. And for me, that's a framework that is helpful because it doesn't focus on a specific technology. You have to obviously put them somewhere in the framework, but it's thinking much more about, how is technology being used? What's the impact on us as individuals and society, rather than what does the technology itself look like?
And one other thing I'd add for the early warning signs,
It has to be optimistic because this is the last thing we're going to say.
Oh, God. Okay. All right. I'll bring it around. How many folks have, speaking of optimism, how many folks have seen Adolescence, the Netflix thing? Okay. Young men and loneliness. This is a real thing. And I think that we haven't really explored AI companions and young men and what this is going to do with something that is already a problem. And so I would just encourage academics and policymakers and folks to look at this problem. There's going to, I can guarantee you, the same way I was obsessed with deepfakes, that there will be research out in the next like 3 or 4 years, and that we should really start looking at this now and start telling these stories now. And to bring it around to an optimistic standpoint, I do think I'd rather be raising my child in an age where it feels like anything is possible with artificial intelligence than, you know, even 10 years ago. And so I actually, as much as it can sound, I sometimes think, going back to Sandra and the mess and talking about the mess, I think we sometimes have to go through the mess to be able to figure out what society we want to live in and how not to think that the world is just awful. And with all of this stuff, there's such tremendous opportunity for the world that our children are going to grow up in. And I am excited about that. So
Thank you very, very much. All complaints about why it was longer to Dan's question. Thank you.